All right, I've given the obligatory 2 minutes for folks to log in a little bit late for anybody that was transitioning from a meeting that just ended at 2:30. So welcome to the Bang Forum for February. Thank you for joining us on this day after a 3-day long weekend. Hope everybody enjoyed their 3-day long weekend. And we're going to get rolling right into our slides and our topic today. So before we get to the topic, a couple real quick updates from Bang. One is that if you have not yet completed the survey, please fill out our survey. We'll post a link to it in the chat at some point. If Winnie doesn't beat me to it, I'll get that done as soon as I'm done talking. And then also wanted to introduce the newest member of the Bang planning team, Joanne. So Joanne, if you want to unmute, say a couple words about yourself or not. Everybody meet Joanne.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say hello to everybody. I'm currently working at DAS on the project portfolio performance team. That is a mouthful. They're responsible for providing support and oversight of projects statewide. I've been a BA for many, many years under a variety of job titles, just like all of the rest of you. And I've been in Oregon for about 8.5 years now. I've had the opportunity to work at education, forestry, treasury, and with fish and wildlife in a variety of projects, and they've all been very exciting. So I'm very happy to be a part of this fellowship of BAs and to help raise awareness about the great work that we're all doing. So thank you.
Awesome. And I'm personally excited to have Joanne not only on my team at Project Portfolio Performance, but also now on the Bang planning team with me. So looking forward to her help in both of those areas. All right, with the housekeeping stuff out of the way, and I saw Winnie posted the survey link, so please wait until after the forum to click that link and take the survey so that you're not distracted from our topic today. Because our topic today is how does CSS support BA work? And we've got Sherry Yoakum and Paul Levine here to talk to us. Did I pronounce that right, Paul? I never bothered to ask you if that was the right pronunciation. They've both been with the state for a while and in CSS, and they're doing some really great things over there. I know because we're all in EIS together. And so I've got the pleasure of working with Paul and Sherry on quite a few occasions as we look at the work that we do and how we support agencies, and more importantly, agencies' projects and how we help you succeed. So they're both here today to talk to us about BA's role in cybersecurity. So I will hand it off to you. Sherry, I think you're the one presenting.
Yes.
So you can take the reins.
There, just a second.
And as Sherry and Paul are presenting, forget to mention this, if you have questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat. Those of us on the Bang planning team will be monitoring that, and we can bring those questions up as there are good natural breaks in Sherry and Paul's presentation.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Tim.
It's all yours.
So I'm Sherry Yoakum. You guys, it's kind of yucky to see your own picture up on the screen sometimes, but currently work for EIS, Enterprise Information Services, Cybersecurity Services, and then currently the interim manager for the business enabling team. And Paul, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Paul Levine, Cybersecurity Services. As you saw from the bio, I've been with CSS since the formation of the unification. Those of you who've been around long enough know I was one of the people brought over from PERS, was my previous agency. And yeah, we kind of work this interesting role, which we'll tell you all about.
And so we wanted to, I'm a huge fan of any kind of org chart, just to kind of have some context of where people fall and sit. So you have Terrence Woods, who's our state chief information officer, Jennifer Bierke, the deputy, and then Ben Gurezgir. I don't know if I said that right, but I've been practicing. He is our chief information security officer, and he came to CSS, I believe, beginning of August of this last year. And previous to that was a senior IT portfolio manager and assistant state CIO in the public safety policy area. So he's got a great background from the P3 lens and the ASCIO lens that he's bringing over with us now. And we still have a vacant position for a deputy CISO that he'll hopefully be recruiting soon. And the deputy generally focuses on the internal operations of CSS, as we are considered a service provider. And again, another lovely org chart to show where our agency, our program area as a whole sits. So you have the governor, and then you have, again, Terrence Wood, our state CIO. And here is cybersecurity services under the 6 different program areas. Some are shared services, P3, strategy and design, and so on. So cybersecurity services, and for, I saw some friendly faces on the attendance list here, and so some of you that have been around a little bit will know that we previously were called Enterprise Security Office, and then in 2019, our agency as a whole rebranded from OSCIO to EIS, and from ESO to Cybersecurity Services. And so within CSS, we have the business security advisors, and up until, I don't know, about what, Paul, a year and a half ago or so, we were previously and have always been called BISOs, Business Information Security Officers. And then when we reclassed, we became Business Security Advisors. The only difference is the title, the service is the same. And so there has historically only been 6 of us that have been on the team, and we've just doubled in size. We have 12 now, and we'll be recruiting for 1 more. Outside of our group, we also have a risk program area. In that risk program area are cyber assessors. So if your agency has gone through a CSS cyber assessment, you're probably very familiar with this group. They come in and they do an assessment on the CIS Basic 6 controls, and then produce a report and give the agency some ideas on how to remediate those findings. We have our network team. So if you are one of our VPN customers, it's called Big IP, and that's our network team that does the VPN. They do all the firewall rules and any configuration changes like that. And we have a security operations center, and they're tasked with, kind of monitoring and responding to any kind of abnormalities, as well as if your agency has a security incident or a breach, agencies are required to report incidents, security incidents or breaches to our SOC. And we have a couple SOC analysts that would walk an agency through how to, 1, stop the incident or breach, and 2, steps to take to remediation. And then we have a vulnerability management team that's also, they fall under the same leadership with the SOC and the VM team, and they use solutions like Tenable to perform scans, and they produce reports that generally go to your CIOs, and then those kind of a need to know after that. And we also have a solutions unit, and they've been heavily involved in the M365 project, the multi-factor authentication kind of research and response to that. And we also have a training. So those of you that, all of us, if you work for the state of Oregon in the executive branch, you have to take an annual security awareness training, and that comes from our office. And we have 1 individual that does those courses and monitors that. And she also has other trainings in Workday that are security related that aren't mandatory. So if you're interested, I just was looking the other day, there's a whole slew of them. And like kind of what Paul alluded to mentioned when he did his introduction, there was a Senate Bill 90 that was introduced back in 2015, and then kind of officially came to be in 2017, where you had security staff in your organizations, and that Senate bill required that we consolidate to 1 agency, so centralized security. And that is what our office is. So some people in our program area were a part of that consolidation, and then there's those like me that came willingly later after consolidation. So We're part of governance and still kind of in the storming phase, I'd say. Wouldn't you say that, Paul? Kind of still evolving and figuring out what worked, what didn't work, fixing it and making it better. So again, those are the program areas within CSS, and some of them are the services that we offer. Paul.
So, at Cybersecurity Services, right? My team and I, the business security advisors, we like to provide a certain suite of services to agencies, and this involves sort of what I would say the proactive side of cybersecurity, right? There's a lot of different ways we can kind of approach cybersecurity, and the other folks that we mentioned, the other program areas, they are on sort of the architectural side. Some of them are on the design side, and then there's a very reactive side too, like we talked about. Issues with the SOC and vulnerability management. When something goes wrong, somebody needs to respond. Our role is really more along the lines of proactive things, right? So we get involved in a lot of different venues, and so the first thing that we get involved in. And to use this, we use a lot of governance to help us navigate our way through this, right? And governance is super important. It shows up in security audits. The minute you start a security audit, the first thing the auditor is going to ask you for are your policies and procedures. And if you don't have those, things don't go so great from then on out, right? So we rely heavily on governance. We also collaborate and contribute to the existing body of governance that's here at the state of Oregon. So things like cybersecurity frameworks, right? The Oregon Cybersecurity Framework that we created, our statewide standards, is tied to and based on a national standard. It's called NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technologies. For those who are in the IT world, they should hopefully know SP 853. So we help manage those standards in terms of work groups and whenever they need to be updated. And we also created a spreadsheet, which we'll talk about a little bit further on, about how to use those standards in whether you're architecting a new solution or you're procuring a new solution, et cetera. One of the things we also get involved in is third-party contract review, right? So anytime anytime an organization is going to make an IT investment, whether it's a custom-built solution or they're buying pre-canned software off the shelf, or they're going to a cloud provider and they're subscribing to a pre-existing solution, and there's all kinds of different ways to mix and match that, right? You can have pre-canned solutions that are customized, et cetera. We'd like to get involved in that also, because again, this is helping us be proactive in terms of how we're going to ask for certain things, whether they be architectural things or helping the agency board or commission understand what the security requirements are for the use case. So we get involved in the contracts, because the contracts are where we can kind of make a little bit more of a guarantee. When we look at a third-party provider, there's going to be varying degrees of responsibilities that they need to take on and to help us protect the data here at the state of Oregon. So we get involved in the contract review. We partnered with DOJ to create these documents. And so then we go into the IT Rider for vendor contracts. The IT Rider is our go-to bread and butter body of contract elements. Again, a lot of the BAs from the state are probably well familiar with. We're the ones who will go to the mat on a lot of these things. We want to hash it out with the vendors and the agencies. Some very important provisions in there, and so we like to make sure we're protected at a contractual level. And so we do this through reviewing the contracts, contributing to the IT Rider. That gets updated on a regular basis as well as the industry changes. Sometimes we may need to modify language, and we partner with the DOJ in helping us to create these templates. We also just do general information requests. Anytime there's some sort of an interesting if you don't really know where to go with your question regarding cybersecurity in a procurement or an investment or a project, we're the ones who will try to help you navigate through that, right? Because we have a lot of program areas, and a lot of our team they're not really publicly facing a lot of the time. They're publicly facing in the sense that they'll do a direct engagement with people, but they're not really there fielding questions generally. And we kind of help with that. Some of them do, and of course we'll volley that over to them if need be. We'll get your question routed to the right person. And so when we look at information requests, we're looking for questions around sort of what do we look for in a vendor, right? And the last bullet point here talks about SOC 2 Type 2 reports and things like that. When we're looking for a good partner at the state of Oregon, we're looking for somebody who's going to take appropriate responsibility to help us protect state data, right? A lot of things are moving to the cloud right now. So that means that the cloud provider is going to take on a greater amount of responsibility. Also in the case of contractors who are either coming on-prem or maybe working in our cloud environment, same kind of thing, right? We want to make sure people are taking appropriate responsibility. And it's difficult to predict what we're going to get from a vendor. So we rely on third-party, assessment systems. So you have certifications, you have assessments, SOC 2 Type 2s and things like that. I could go on for another 15, 20 minutes just on all the different types of assessments that are out there. But these are just tools to help us pick good vendors. We want to encourage agencies and our partners to go for folks who are doing their due diligence, and they also have the courage to go to a regulatory board of some kind or a third-party assessor and say, hey, give us a grading. Do you have a FedRAMP certification or ISO certification? Those are not easy to get, and it's a kind of a bold move. So if a vendor has done that, that helps make us feel a little better about that we're partnering with somebody who's making good on what they say they're going to do. So next slide.
I just want to put in a plug real quick if I can.
Yeah.
So like Paul said, we have the IT writer that's for vendor contracts only. So it's your specific Oregon terms and conditions, and they're not all security. They have a whole bunch of legal ease kind of things that covers Oregon. But we've also developed, and I saw some procurement folks here, a security exhibit that would be for agency contracts, and it's generally called an Exhibit K. I don't know why, but it generally is. And that has similar information that's in the rider. So again, we want to so badly partner with the agency procurement and DAS procurement folks so we can get those type of documents socialized and normalized, and so we don't have to reinvent the wheel for every single IT procurement. We're also in the process of developing kind of standardized language for an RFQ or an RFP. So as you guys, start working with your IT folks or project folks and you're developing things, just know that we want to give you as much information up front so there's less to do in the back end. And I will move to the next slide, Paul.
And Paul, there's a question in the chat for you.
Oh.
I believe it's related to this slide.
Okay.
What are some things you are looking for when assisting with contract reviews?
Some of the things we're looking for, we take the use case into account first, right? We want to understand what the ramifications of and I'll talk about that in a few minutes here. We have a data classification system. We're looking at how important the data is, right? And there's all kinds of different ways to parse out how important that data is. Some of it's privacy related, some of it's confidentiality related in terms of, just releasing information to the public that just shouldn't be out there. Privacy is the biggest one out there, I think, right now. It's a very important element that we deal with. It's probably the more common one, but there's certain things like, imagine, Oregon State Police, right? They don't have they have privacy stuff that comes in the form of criminal justice information, but there's also things about, just safety, right? Just making sure weapons are secured and things like that. So there's all kinds of different aspects to it. There's also mission criticality. So if it's data that's very impossible to recreate, if it's your sole source of record, or if it's the data in which you run your agency board or commission on, then we're going to treat that a little bit differently also, right? We're going to up the importance level. So that kind of affects sort of the approach we're going to take in what we call the use case. Now, when it comes to the contracts, right, there's a lot of elements in there that have to do with sort of basic confidentiality, privacy. And then we actually started writing a bunch of granular things in there, like we want access to security logs. We want to know that they're doing background checks. We want to know that they do internal cybersecurity training. We want to know if they have a breach, that they're going to notify us in an appropriate amount of time. And that ties into our not only our internal breach notification system, but there are statutes that mandate, if you're going to do business with the state of Oregon, how quickly you have to notify us. So there, we do go into the weeds on a couple of cybersecurity related elements. But again, some of them are not super important depending on the use case. So we can be a little bit flexible here and there on some of those elements. But we take the use case into account, we take the importance of the data into account, and then we'll kind of make some judgment calls about what can and can't be kept. And then the thing we like to do is we really like to partner with our DOJ partners. The lawyers at the DOJ, we have a great rapport with them, and we kind of bounce off each other a lot in terms of helping to manage that conversation with the vendor about some of these things that we ask for, because we ask for some tough things sometimes. So if we need to massage the language a little bit, right? That's not really our bailiwick. We don't do legalese. But if they come to us and say, hey, they're asking for a modification on this, we'll say, okay, that's fine. But the DOJ will then they'll write it out so that it makes sense to them legally. So it's about partnerships between the agency, the DOJ, and us at CSS. And we love being in communication and having those conversations back and forth. So that's super helpful for us.
And when we say we mean the royal we, like we're working with the agency. So like we from our roles we don't review security logs. We want to make sure that the agency or the program project people have retained the contractual ability to get logs, should that be needed for the project and just again have the legal ability via a contract to ask for certain items like a third party assessment or audit. You may not ask for one right off the bat. It all depends on some of the slides we're going to talk about here in a few. Let me move forward. Are there any other questions, Tim?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let's imagine a project is underway. The biggest types of projects that we deal with are RFPs, requests for proposals. Of course, RFQs come in a close second, and then a lot of things come in via, purchase agreements, Oregon buys, other purchase vehicles, or some pre-existing negotiated contracts that we have with certain vendors. And so when we get involved, once a project is actually in flight, there's a core set of things that we like to ask for, and some of them are written into statute. Policy. One of them is based on a policy, and one of them is written into statute. And then there's some things that are kind of buried in the statewide standards that we like to call out, because it really helps a project go better if you kind of get this stuff out in the open as early as possible. And I'll talk more about that shortly here. So for the Oregon statute that now manages our role in terms of cybersecurity at the state of Oregon. One of the things, of course, like I mentioned before, we really want to make sure there's governance around everything that we have set up, right? So system security plans are a good way to start to document what you're doing, how you're doing it, how your cybersecurity is configured, et cetera. And so statute mandates that agencies are supposed to have these. But of course, as we've evolved over the years, and there's a lot of systems that are very old, we don't have them across the board. So anytime we have an opportunity where a new project is underway, we like to ask for these. So let's start getting these gaps filled up, right? So a project comes in and you say, okay, we're going to be spending, $5 million on this new system. It's a cloud vendor. We're going to bake it into the RFP saying that, hey, vendor and the agency, you're going to work with us to create this document. We're going to want to see a system security plan for this new system that's being stood up. We have a template that we created a couple of years ago. It's soon to be updated, but the one that we have right now is okay. It was built for an earlier time, trying to make it a little bit easier on agencies, but it still covers some good territory. And it's broken up into 3 sections, and they kind of go from a high level to a mid level to a really granular approach in terms of what, how is the system managing its security. And so they're welcome to use the template. It's based on the FedRAMP system security plan template. We modified it a little bit to make it more digestible when we first built this, 4 or 5 years ago now. Like I said, it's due for an upgrade, but that'll come when it comes. But it's a really good way to kind of start that governance process, right? So that if an audit comes in, if something happens, touch wood, if there's an investigation, it's going to look better if we have some documentation around it, right? Before things go weird. The next one is our cloud workbook. So we have an internal policy at DAS. You see the number there, 107.004.150. This has to do with managing risk in cloud environments. And so when we look at things that are what we call on-premises, right? Any system that's built over at the data center in Salem, or if an agency still has their own internal data centers, there's a few agencies that still have their own IT on-prem. We already know and accept all of those risks that are inherent to managing the data on premises. When it comes to going to the cloud, right, the risk profile changes dramatically because, like I said before, the vendor is now going to assume a certain amount of the responsibility to help protect that data. So the cloud workbook policy, or the cloud policy, was designed around certain risk factors. I'm not going to read them out right now. I don't have them in front of me, and I don't have them memorized. But basically, we're looking to see kind of the same kind of questions. Has the agency and the vendor talked about things like disaster recovery, business continuity? Are there third-party assessments involved? Is there a training program? How does this vendor manage their cybersecurity profile when it comes to how they manage their customers? And for those of you who've been through this kind of thing before, you'll find out that it varies widely across the industry. And there's a lot of vendors who are very mature and a lot of vendors who are very immature. Some don't even seem to really pay much of an attention to it. But if we're going to send state data off-site, then we want to start asking some really important questions. The policy is limited. It's not on parity with where our IT rider is right now. We were talking about before the set of contractual elements that we asked for. So the things in the rider and the templates, the contract templates, that's actually a bigger list than what you find in the cloud workbook. Nonetheless, the policy is still here. It's still in effect, and the cloud workbook is still required by agencies to fill that out. And it's really, for us right now, we're treating it as a conversation starter, right? So you get that cloud workbook filled out, and it helps us understand the use case. It helps us understand some of the basics of what's going on with this intended use. And it helps us get the conversation going with the agency. We also like to offer collaboration services with this, right? So, and this is important for business analysts like yourselves and project managers as well to understand. Some of the questions are a little bit technical, and we understand that, the people who are going to be tasked with filling this out are not technical. So by all means, contact us. We're not just going to ask you to throw it over the wall, and we're not going to grade you. If you'd like to spend some time with us on a call to go through the questions and help you understand what we're asking and why we're asking, by all means, set up that time on our schedules. That's what we're here for, right? We're here to help you navigate through these things. But they're open-ended essay questions. They're a bit challenging to figure out. So like I said, it helps us open that conversation up. And so that's one of the deliverables that we have to require of an agency. And then one of the other things that's really super important to highlight, this one is technically in the statewide standards, and it's a very important thing to consider, especially for new systems that are being stood up. And that has to do with security scan before a new system goes live. The reason we ask for that, of course, is because, especially in the case of custom-built systems, it's very, very important to make sure that no vulnerabilities were introduced right from the jump, right? And we have a number of agencies that have internal development teams on staff, and at the data center, we have developers and things like that. And so anytime before a system goes live, before they flip the switch and people from the internet can start connecting to it, we want to make sure there are no vulnerabilities. We want to make sure all the standard cybersecurity elements are tested and that it's as solid as we can possibly make it to the best of our knowledge. So it's important to bake that in to, again, to the RFPs, to the projects. We don't want to come at the 11th hour and say, oh, hey, did you do the security scan before go live? And these things can be pretty expensive depending on the scope of what's being constructed. It's good to get that conversation out in the open as early as possible. Sometimes it's just as simple as, running a vulnerability scan. Sometimes you have to hire people, and it could take a couple of weeks to get that deliverable handled. So I like to call those out. It's a wonderful thing for an agency or any organization to do before you flip the switch. That way you're not trying to fix things after the fact or introducing vulnerabilities right from the jump. Any questions before I move on to the next slide?
I was going to add something if there's no questions.
I don't see any yet. Someone might be typing, so go for it, Sherry.
Okay.
And then I'll check again.
So specific to the cloud workbook, there's 3 sections to it, and section A kind of guides and how that's answered determines if you fill out section B1 and B2. And the way I like to explain it is, like Paul said, it helps you as a program or you as an agency evaluate and weigh your risks. And so the way section A, once you start answering that, it either says you have a low risk or it says you have a high risk. And then if you have a high risk situation based off the answers to section A, section B1 is kind of reflective of your requirements of the system or your requirements as an agency, depending, if you have regulatory data involved or anything like that. And then section B2 is usually a reflection of the contract with the vendor. And so when you're filling those out, we like agencies or whoever's filling out to point to the section in the contract that would answer that question. And then when we go to review and sign it, we request that agencies send the contract with them if we haven't reviewed it already. And it's kind of a trust but verify and make sure that that language is there.
So I saw Tim Ryan's question about when we expect security scans before go live. It's baked into RFPs. That's where we like to really call it out, especially for custom built systems. If it's a pre-canned system or something that somebody's just subscribing to a new instance with a cloud provider, sometimes we'll accept things like, if they're getting regular audits and they're doing security testing, regular security testing of their service, then we can accept that as meeting that requirement, for example. We also like to ask for those during RFQs. That's an easier way for an agency to kind of purchase something from an existing body of vendors. I like to ask for it. We don't require it in that case oftentimes, but again, I like to ask for it, especially in custom built situations. Super helpful.
So Paul, that sounded like kind of a depends answer.
It depends. Yeah, it depends.
Seems like if I was a BA out there on a project and I wanted to know if I was going to need to help my PM make sure that we had that security scan before go live, I'd want to make sure we were talking to a BSA early on in the game, probably when we're filling out that cloud workbook, to make sure we understand where that's going to land. Does that sound about right?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Next slide, Paul.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And there we go. Okay.
Okay. So like I mentioned, one of the things, one of the more important things that we ask super early on has to do with what we call data classification and system classification. We have a system at the state that classifies data. It's a 4-level system for the classification for the data, and then so levels 1 and 2 refer to data. Level 1 data is anything that's already published, publicly accessible, like on a website or a brochure, for example. Level 2 data is data that usually means that somebody has to request it, right? So it's not published by default, but if the information got out, it wouldn't cause any negative impact to anyone. But it's something we definitely don't like to broadcast either, right? Where things start to get interesting is what we call level 3 data. The most classic example of level 3 data that refers to any data, if it got out, would cause harm to someone. And I'm not talking about physical harm necessarily, but the most common example is PII, personally identifiable information, privacy-related data, things like HIPAA, for example. That's the most common use case for level 3 data. Anything that involves a username, social security number, a name and social security number, address, any combination of data that can be used to gain information about a person that might be used for things like identity theft or fraud, things like that. CJI, criminal justice information I mentioned earlier, is another interesting use case because that's by default, that's level 3 data. However, and I'll talk about level 4 data here real quick in a second, but some CJI is level 4 data, but I'll talk about that. PCI data, payment card information, financial stuff, again, things that we don't want to get out to just anyone. Even if they ask, that data has to be protected. Level 4 data is pretty rare at the state. That has to do with data if the exposure of that data could cause significant harm to someone, a la life and limb, right? So if you could well imagine things that are in the CJI realm definitely need to be protected. And there's additional rules around that falls into a realm of regulated data. I should probably mention regulated data here, by the way, now that I think about it. Regulated data refers to any external organization that sets parameters around the use and dissemination of information. So regulatory boards, things like PCI, HIPAA, CJI, or CGIS in terms of the FBI, those are third-party organizations that help set those parameters. We at CSS do our best to understand those things, but the agency is still ultimately responsible for their regulatory compliance. So we partner with the agencies in that regard, but we can't really fully accept full responsibility just because of the fact that it's not our business. It's technically the agency's business. So anyway, back to level 4 data, right? So we're talking about life and limb in that circumstance, right? Things like undercover police officers, right? We don't ever want the information of who they are and where they actually live to get out. That's one of the more classic examples.
Witness
I think
protection.
judges,
Yeah.
huh?
Witness protection.
Witness protection, right? And I think the names and addresses of judges are also treated accordingly, things like that. So then we have this low, moderate, and moderate plus, those columns that you see there. That's sort of a reflection of NIST's classification system, right? So I mentioned NIST SP 853. The federal agents, the federal, I guess we call them federal organization, sets the parameters, sort of a low, medium, and high, right? And so we'll classify a system according to low, moderate, and moderate plus. And moderate plus means it's going to include regulatory data or level 4 data, right? Low system, again, we're not going to really throw the book at the vendor. We're not going to take a really stringent approach. However, there still are some privacy concerns with that, right? So usernames and passwords, for example. We want to make sure usernames and passwords are still treated accordingly. That technically still counts as level 3 data. We're not going to treat the entire system that way, but we want to make sure that the vendor is going to, make sure, usernames and passwords are protected accordingly. Moderate, again, like I said, that's sort of the bulk of where a lot of our security concerns are. Moderate system has to do with whether it's level 3 data and or it involves mission critical systems or systems of record, restricted or regulated data at a, sort of a mid-level. And like I said, moderate plus is where we'll kind of classify something as it's moderate, and then we're going to have additional concerns to ask. In the case of level 4 data, right? If an agency board or commission actually does have level 4 data, that's treated very, very uniquely, especially by DOJ, right? They have a different set of contracts that they use, and generally we really discourage agencies from putting any level 4 data in the cloud. I do believe there are a small number of instances where it has been allowed, but those are going to end up producing conversations between leaders at that point, right? We kind of step away from that conversation, and those are conversations that leaders need to have with each other to really understand the scope of what they're doing and really make sure that this is a wise decision to put that level 4 data in the cloud, and that the vendor is really going to treat that data accordingly, right? When I mentioned FedRAMP earlier, FedRAMP is a system that exists out there that helps federal agencies find vendors who have already been pre-certified to handle their low, moderate, and high classification systems, right? And so FedRAMP, their moderate controls are very, very good. And so if you find a vendor that has FedRAMP moderate class certification for their product, then you know that they're doing a really good job. There's a handful of those out there that have FedRAMP high, for example, right? And that tells you that they're probably dealing with, like I said, you know, these situations of really grave consequences if that data gets out. So again, that's why we look to those third-party organizations to help us with that kind of thing.
Paul, I was going to add
I may have
2
rambled there.
points. I was going to add 2 points here on this slide specifically. Generally, when we get assigned, whether it's through P3 requesting an assignment or otherwise, the first thing one of our team members wants to understand is what the system classification is. Is it low, moderate plus? And if you're not sure, we can help walk you through that.
Yeah.
And then the second part is just some context. If you've ever looked at our security standards out on our website, it's a PDF document. It's about 80-ish pages, so it's a lot. But the difference in security or IT controls between the 3 classifications here is the difference between low and moderate is about 200 controls. Like moderate has additional 200 controls from the low system, and the difference between moderate and moderate plus is about 3 controls. But those 3 controls are pretty extensive. We're talking like some big, like red team exercises that I couldn't begin to tell you exactly what those are, but they're pretty extensive.
And a higher degree of control, especially when it comes to CGIS, that's the FBI's system. Physical controls also. Physical controls become very important too. So make sure that there's proper physical barriers around all of the systems that house the data, et cetera. So yeah. I don't think I see any questions pop up. Go on to the next slide.
Next slide.
Yeah.
Yep, I don't see any.
So so like Sherry mentioned, we have the security standard spreadsheet. And that's just a snippet of the spreadsheet there, just to kind of give you an idea of how it looks. What we did is we took all of our statewide standards and we put them into spreadsheet form. Makes it a little bit easier to parse the documents so you can scroll all the way down. And if you look over there on the left, first left column, right, you'll see the control family, right? So the NIST controls and our standards likewise are broken up into families, different groupings. Things like personnel management, identification and authentication, physical controls, training and awareness, that kind of thing. And so as you scroll, you know, if you were to scroll down through that list, you'll see all the different controls, and then the control name will tell you the title of the control name. You can't really see it in this example here in the slide, but if you were to hover your mouse over that column, you'll see the actual text of each control as it pops up to tell you all the details that you're asking for, right? And so we use this spreadsheet, we'll put this in front of a vendor, and we'll say, tell us about your security posture, right? How do you manage your security in relation to our security standards? And the reason we do this is so that we help the agencies and the vendors make sure there's a good fit, right? So that we're going to find a vendor who's going to fit our approach to security, and again, take that appropriate responsibility. So as they fill this out, right, they're going to fill out whether or not that and the all in moderate columns there in the middle there, that just determines, like we said, whether it's low system or a moderate and moderate plus is a different spreadsheet. And again, we'll just treat that very, very differently. So all the controls, you'll see checked off whether or not they're even applicable to that system. So now we want to find out if that vendor's security is going to be handled on premises with their system or off premises, whether or not it's baked into their system, whether or not it's an add-on, whether it's a third-party element, etc. And then we all want to understand the responsibility too, because in cloud environments, there's a shared responsibility. I realize in hindsight now, I probably should have brought up the shared responsibility matrix that exists out there. But what it means is that there's you just imagine a lot of fade in between, right? So identification and authentication, right? User account management, for example. The vendor's going to need to manage a lot of the user account stuff, and the agency, of course, when they take control of the system, they're going to be able to manage a lot of the user authentication, for example. So there's a lot of flow between some of the things like the physical environment. One of the controls that we have further down, that's definitely going to be all the vendor in a cloud environment, because this is their environment. This is their hosted system. So, the agency in the state of Oregon are not going to touch the physical controls at all, for example. So that's definitely going to be all on the vendor. But again, so we have a lot of gray area depending on the way the systems are architected. So we want to understand whose responsibilities are going to be for this particular control as we go down the list. And then we like them to fill out the comments, right? And the reason we have them fill out the comments are there's a lot of different reasons why we like to have the comments. First of all, not everyone follows NIST SP 853, right? Some people follow ISO, International Standards Organization, cybersecurity controls. Others follow forget CSF, which is still technically part of NIST, but it's just slightly different methodology for structuring those. And some of them don't follow any architecture at all. So what we're asking are basically a lot of I'm trying to find the right term here. I want to say invasive. They're really personal questions to the organization. And because these are industry standard controls, a lot of companies are leery to tell us about how they do their cybersecurity, and rightfully so, right? You don't want to give any attackers any leg up on what you're doing and how you're doing it. However, for example, NIST is a well-known format. Everyone knows all the controls in NIST. I don't think you're really giving away the keys to the kingdom if you're saying we follow NIST. If anything, that should scare attackers away because it's a pretty rock solid format. And so it doesn't really give attackers any leg up, really, or shouldn't. Or if it does, it is reconnaissance to a certain degree. But again, how it's actually implemented, how they can get around it, that they're still going to have to try and pull off some really elaborate attacking to make that happen. So anyway, a lot of vendors don't like filling these out, is what I'm trying to say. And so what we'll ask for in the comments is, if you don't want to tell us the details, for example, how you respond to that control, you can always, if you have or if the vendor has internal governance, policies, procedures, standards, etc., they can always just refer out to it, right? They can just say, see section 2.1 of our policy. Now, if we want to do an NDA with the vendor, that maybe they'll share that with us, or maybe they just won't, right? Maybe they'll just refuse flat out to share that with us, and that I understand that to a small degree. But nonetheless, if they want to fill out, hey, we do this, it's just, we're going to keep that confidential. That's fine. We'll have to take them at their word for it and rely on a third-party assessment to really make sure that they've been tested against those controls. The other thing has to do with just details, just tell us, elaborate on some of these things. There's different ways to approach all of these controls. So just elaborate. How does the vendor handle these controls? It helps us understand what the vendor's thinking, how they approach their cybersecurity posture, and it helps all of us get a better picture of what this organization does and how serious they really are about cybersecurity. And if anybody on the call has been through an RFP with us before, you'll get widely varied types of responses to this spreadsheet. It's fascinating every time we run this exercise. And the other thing I want to understand is that some of these things are functional controls within the application, and some of these things are architectural, sort of under the hood, right? And the spreadsheet doesn't really discern between the two very well. So what we're asking for is kind of the kitchen sink. We want to know everything we could possibly know about that. So imagine, if you will, if you're going to something like DocuSign.com, right? You're signing up for managing and signing documents with DocuSign. Okay, so DocuSign, as a cloud provider, they have a cloud service. They have a bunch of servers and a bunch of machines that run all of this software. There's a security architecture to that back end. Now, as a user, right, an agency that's going to now subscribe to DocuSign and then start using it, right, there's security features in the application, right? So that's what I'm talking about, that you have security features as a user and you have the security architecture behind the scenes. So sussing that out is kind of where we'd like to jump in and help out as best as we can. The third-party assessments really help us paint the better picture about them as a vendor and their architecture. And this can be used really more for, in terms of the interface between the agency and the vendor. What can we do? What can't we do? What are you going to do for us? What's responsible for? What still relies in the responsibility for the agency? So.
And Paul, I was going to add a few things like, so this spreadsheet, granted, we're just showing you a top little corner of it, but it is pretty daunting itself. It's 319 cells long, but it captures every single control that would be applicable or map back to a low, moderate plus. And the reason why this was developed pre-COVID, so early 2019-ish for a specific project with a specific agency based on having a failed RFP recruitment or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, some of the answers that you would get from a vendor with this spreadsheet are things that you unfortunately wouldn't find out until after maybe a contract is signed, or you unfortunately have a security incident or breach, and then you find out things that the vendor's saying, oh no, we don't do that, you're responsible for that. So the idea was to kind of highlight up front from the vendor's perspective of what they think they're responsible for, what they think you're responsible for, and then what is a shared responsibility. So maybe some of that confusion is sorted out before you pick a vendor and before you sign a contract. If you are to use this spreadsheet in an RFP or RFQ, it's not a required tool. This is so far, none of our CISOs have said, given that edict of thou shalt use this. You can't even find it on our website because it hasn't been officially handled in that way. And so we can email it to Tim and team, and who can send it out to you. However, I don't want to do that quite yet. We can maybe do it on a case-by-case basis because we're going to be updating this very soon. So it could be real old real quick. We have, oh, there's one more thing I was going to add about that.
Well, I have one other thought along that same line, right? So Sherry mentioned that, this is a tool, it's not mandatory. We were using it a lot just before COVID and during COVID. However, because of we're still kind of learning as we go, right? We're still trying to craft our approach to partnering with agencies and finding good cybersecurity, good vendors, cloud providers in particular. And because of the fact we've gotten such a wide variety of responses, using the spreadsheet has actually ended up being a bit more frustrating than it was worth, actually. So we're still navigating our way through how we're going to do this. And so, like I said before, we focus a lot on third-party assessments, and we may start moving towards that. It's hard to predict right now how we want to do that. And we're not the only state, and we're not the only organization that struggles with this, right? The reason we do this, like she said, that things go wrong. If there's a breach, I'm sure maybe some of you have heard about some of the bigger breaches in the news. We're very attuned to all of these breaches, and as an organization who helps people pick vendors, right? When you see a breach come through and you read the news as to the utterly stunning lack of follow through and the scope of negligence in some of these situations is stunning, really jaw dropping. You think about a company has a really good reputation in the industry, and you find out they weren't doing basic cybersecurity controls, and it's very frustrating. So, we don't want there to be a breach. We want to do the best that we can to find somebody who's serious and responsible and mature. And so we're trying to figure out how do we guarantee that? How do we find the proper vendor? So this is one of the tools we've been trying out, and it helps a little bit, but in other times the vendors don't like to communicate, and they can be very elusive as well. So.
And if it's chosen to use this tool in an RFQ, RFP, whatever the business reason is, or the purchase, our team, along with ideally some agency IT folks, would be the one reviewing the vendor responses and providing a summary or feedback to the scorers of the RFP. So we don't sit on an RFP by way of being a scorer. We are a SME, subject matter expert, that's brought in to review documents like this or any other type of security documentation that vendor may have to give you some insight to that.
Yeah, creating a scoring schema around this is super challenging because the variety of use cases and the variety of vendors, and it's hard to be fair, believe it or not. And I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but yeah, it can be challenging.
Can we go to the next slide?
I think so. Listen,
Okay.
Okay. So, the role of a BA in cybersecurity. What do we like to ask from you folks and the folks that we've collaborated with in the past? It's our view that business analysts are instrumental in making sure all the necessary voices are at the table when a project gets underway. Same thing goes for the project manager as well, right? I think it's kind of a hand-in-hand thing, right? And there's a couple of reasons why we want to make sure cybersecurity is at the table. And for those who are not at the state, if you're not already doing so, we highly recommend that you start involving your cybersecurity and IT professionals in these discussions, because again, it helps prevent problems down the road. So while we definitely seek to collaborate and support each agency in their mission, one of the things that's still a bit challenging since the unification to elaborate on is that all agencies still are technically the owners of the data, and therefore they own all of the risk, right? And even though cybersecurity has been unified at the state, the policy still stands and the statute still stands such that the agencies are still ultimately responsible, which means they're going to look to us to make sure that the protections are in place and that we're all doing diligence, et cetera. So that's why it's important to have us all at the table early on. It's not like you can just hot potato security over to us and assume that we've got it all under control, right? I wish we could. I wish we could set up a rock solid system and make it super easy so that the agencies don't have to do anything, but it's not the way it is right now, right? And we're still in a period of transition, right? After unification, even after all these years, we're still bringing a lot of things in-house. We're still centralizing a lot of things. We're still developing a lot of enterprise offerings. So that's still growing even as I speak. I don't know if I'm going to hit that question yet, or maybe I should wait a minute here. Let me see what that question said. Oh, okay. Do I assist with guidance for requirements identification? Well, the requirements identification, excellent question, because another reason why we created that spreadsheet is a lot of agencies were creating their own requirements documents, and they were not necessarily in alignment with the statewide standards. And then we had sort of a mix and match of, the spreadsheet plus this other list of requirements. And so we like to encourage people to use the statewide standards first and foremost. If you want to add anything to them per your regulatory needs, by all means, those can be added via an addendum or something to that effect. But yes, we do assist with requirements. We're more than happy to get into a conversation with an organization regarding what those requirements are and why we asked for them, stuff like that. So yeah, we definitely assist with that kind of guidance. So yeah. The reason why we look for this collaborative environment, right, is in IT, especially in cybersecurity, we like to say that there's two ways to approach cybersecurity, right? So-called baked in or bolted on, right? Baked in refers to that the security was architected into the solution from the beginning, that the applications were developed securely, that the systems were stood up securely, the networks were configured securely, et cetera. The other way is we call bolted on, right? So you move fast, you break things, you set a system up and you turn it on the internet, and then suddenly you find out there's all sorts of vulnerabilities. And then you're going back after the fact and you're trying to bolt the security on. As you might well imagine, baked in is far better than bolted on, both from a cost perspective as well as from a security perspective. The thing is, this is a really hard thing to sell to a lot of people in leadership because it makes people slow down a little bit, right? You can't move as fast and break things as quickly. And that sucks, especially in the private sector, because there's a lot of pressure to move to get things to market as quickly as possible. And I get that. And same thing when it comes to, we dealt with this a lot during COVID, right? A lot of agencies are tasked with moving fast because there is a public need that we can't dawdle on at all. And so we need to move fast and get things stood up. So we do our best in those circumstances to get things as baked in as we possibly can. Again, partnering with organizations that may have already done that due diligence and produce a product that we can already rely on significantly. Or if their development environment already does secure development coding processes as they develop things, or their network administrators are certified and they've already have a securely architected network, et cetera. So we do the best we can with what we've got, but nonetheless, it does make you slow down, especially in the case of RFPs and RFQs, right? If you have the time, it's better to have those conversations early on than at the last minute. Cybersecurity is also being consulted in the oversight process. Here at the state of Oregon, we are not technically oversight. However, the oversight apparatus at the state of Oregon does look to us to consult. They want to know that we've looked at the solution and the architecture and that we have no questions or concerns outstanding with the implementation. And so we work with Project Portfolio and Performance, the P3 team, with the SIPMs and the oversight analysts. And we make sure everyone's in the loop. We all make sure, we all try to do our best to make sure all of us are in the same loop, right? And so the SIPMs try to make sure we're in the conversation and conversely the same thing back. We do our best, but we've got a lot of points of contact to have to navigate. So I wish I could say we were seamless and smooth, but we have our good moments and we have our frustrating moments. But nonetheless, we like to be part of that conversation, and they look to us to make sure that all of these cybersecurity elements are addressed, because the last point having to do with not holding things up at the end, right? We don't want to rubber stamp anything by any means, and we also don't want to hold up a procurement when it's you have to have it signed on at the end of April, and suddenly on April 20th we're telling people, you know what, you didn't do half of the stuff we need you to do, and that's going to mess up a deadline to get something signed. So so we like to work with the business analysts as much as possible, and so get us involved as early and often as possible. JLB has her hand up.
Uh-oh.
Here comes trouble.
I'm just curious. So, I know things like statements of work and work order contracts and stuff like that also have to go through a security review.
Right.
It's been recently, there's been a practice where like our oversight analyst doesn't want to see, say, the statement of work until it's a very clean, almost final version. Is it okay for us to contact our business security? What are you guys? I'm going to call you a
Business security
BSO,
analysts.
business security analyst, before it goes to our oversight analyst for feedback, or does it have to go through them before it goes to you?
Jennifer, that's a brilliant question. Thank you. I love this
I
question.
am a brilliant person,
Oh,
but I
man.
appreciate you
Wow.
acknowledging that publicly.
Thank you for saying that.
While it's being recorded.
Yes. So well said, because yes, while P3 has their process, you're right, P3 does have their process. The sooner you get us involved, the better, and definitely get those things to us, especially if there's a lot of red lines or if there's a lot of things getting dropped by the vendor. Again, get us involved as early as possible, and we can help in those conversations. So don't necessarily wait for your oversight analyst or your SIPM to do the clean version. We like to be involved in the drafting process, and we're always open for conversations, meetings, quick calls, etc. Like I said, yeah, we don't like to be the stick in the mud at the 11th hour. I hate being that person, but I very much am willing to do that, right? Because I want to make sure that the due diligence is being followed, because, well, that's our job. We are the due diligence people, right? So
I can contact you directly if you're my assigned.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes a lot of my colleagues are often, and I get the same thing too, we're often thrown into regularly recurring meetings, for example. If there's a team meeting or a project meeting that happens regularly, sometimes we're added to that just so it's blocked out on our calendar. That way, and even if we don't have to be present for every call, at least it's blocked out on our calendar. We know that we can be available for you, or at least give us a heads up. Hey, next Tuesday we're going to be talking about the statement of work. Let's get the security analyst in the call. Oh, and another thing that's important to remember too. A lot of agencies still have, of course, their own internal IT people, and the role between security and IT is still a very blurred line nowadays. And so I really encourage all business analysts, if you're not already doing so, make sure you do have a channel to your IT professionals in your organization as well. And we like to try and make sure we develop that rapport and communication as well. Have sort of a three-way conversation between ourselves, the IT, and at the agency, and the business at the agency, because they know far more than we do when it comes to the ugly details, to how things are configured, why they're configured, maybe some legacy conflict that we didn't even know about, et cetera. They know the business way better than we do. So it's super important to have your own IT people at the table. Technically, there are a few people at some of the agencies that still have a very strong security focus as well. They did not get moved over during the unification for whatever reason, different rabbit hole. But nonetheless, again, we'd love to have those people in the conversation as well. For example, over at DHS OHA, right? The ISPO, right? I love collaborating with them over at DHS OHA. Those are the privacy folks over there, again, because they know their business way better than I do. And it's super important to have them in the conversation as well, because and it's also about perspective, right? I love multiple perspectives when it comes to reviewing statements of work, standard spreadsheets, things like that, SOC 2, Type 2 reports, any sort of review of documentation that we're going to do. I love having their perspective because, again, I'm coming from the outside. I have sort of the idealistic view. It's great to have somebody who has a much more realistic perspective in the conversation as well. So.
Another thing I was going to add, Paul, too, that I failed to mention earlier is our statewide security standards. As Paul mentioned, they're modeled after NIST 853 revision 5 that's currently out, but just they are basically IT controls with the security weighting to each one of it. It kind of maps back to a low, moderate, or moderate plus system, or it's enterprise wide, those kind of things. So it's important that not just anybody in security understands them. It's important that IT understands them as well. Let me go to the next slide.
I think so.
Yeah, which will basically, the next slide is a good summary of what we've been talking about.
Great. So again, back to Jennifer's question, communicate with us early and often. Keep us in the loop as best as you possibly can. Again, making sure all appropriate agency personnel are involved. Again, we love the multiplicity of perspectives. It helps us really get to the heart of the matter. And just to remember that there really are important cybersecurity elements for all IT investments. Third-party audits, security spreadsheets, selecting a good vendor, weeding through a lot of the chaff, understanding some of the promises that the salesperson might have made. That's another fun one, right? Just understanding what the use case is. What kind of data is going off site? Why are we asking some of these questions? Why are we getting a little bit more in a twist than we might have otherwise, et cetera? Vendor reputation, that kind of thing. And so, like I said, we're here to help. We are sort of one of the more publicly facing arms of cybersecurity services. And so we have an info box that we leave open to everyone. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at eso.info@daz.oregon.gov. You're going to get either Sherry or one of our other illustrious colleagues. And so Sherry or myself will probably be manning that info box, and we'll do our best to either route your question or answer directly. And the same thing goes for any new IT investments coming in, any new work. Sort of our inbox, our intake list as well kind of comes through there. So.
And then the last is questions.
I think I went over on time. I've been just yammering. My voice hurts. Any questions? Please don't ask any questions. I can't speak anymore.
Just kidding.
We'll give them a
Just
minute
kidding.
or two just in case some folks are typing their questions. And you did just fine on time, Paul.
Okay, good.
Timothy, do you want to unmute yourself if you're able to? I see your hand up.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Paul. I'm curious if you have anything to expand on in thinking about, is there any documented CSS guidance on how to consider what makes a good IT partner for third-party contracts beyond the contractual protections that we look for via the cloud workbook? Like you said, vendor experience or reputation or security controls that are documented but not necessarily explicit in the contract terms, like those third-party audits and assessments, FedRAMP, ISO, all that stuff. And if so, like where do you see people? Where do you see the appropriate place to document those kind of considerations? There's something that there are themes that I see explored in the DASK insurance risk assessment for IT investments, but the cloud workbook seems to be more contractually focused since that's the strongest guarantee.
Yeah. So right now, the only thing I would say is the cloud policy and any other related policies, but those are really dry and they're hard to navigate. But yeah, that's the only thing we have. We have drafted some agency guidance. We have not published it yet because there's a moving target, right? Every time we think we have a beat on what we're doing and how we're doing it, CSS changes their tack a little bit. So it's hard to lock that document in, but I'm hoping to have something created sometime soon here.
Okay.
So
I guess this
kind of sort
workshop
of
is a
like
good one.
you know about the only one that we have, but yeah, hopefully we'll get something much more helpful published.
Is it okay to include some of those things in the cloud workbook as in addition to the contractual protections you might obtain? Is it worthwhile to? I mean, I've seen it done, and I've done it myself before. Where like, in addition to those things, we also notice that they have ISO and SOC 2 certifications, and they're using FedRAMP authorized data centers, but it's not necessarily something we can always get into the terms.
Right. Yeah, it's navigating through that it was hard to write the document, I got to tell you, because it's kind of enmeshed, right? There's all kinds of different elements to look at. What kind of a cloud service are they? What kind of application are you looking for? Is subscription, is a custom build, on-prem, off-prem, hybrid, right? We have a lot of hybrid solutions where there's a front end at one location and some data residing at the data center. It can get real complex real fast. So.
Thanks. And when it comes to those, do you have any guidance on obtaining verification of vendor claims that they hold certain certifications or undergo certain audits? With FedRAMP Marketplace, it's easy to see. There's a master list there, but what about for ISO or SOC 2 certs? I'm not aware of like a master list. Usually, you just have to ask the vendor if they'll share it, or do you ever reach out to accreditation bodies directly?
Yeah, that's a great question because some of those accreditations, especially when you look on a website and you'll see, their security advertisement, how good they are. A lot of vendors can be a bit creative with the what kind of certifications they have. It's kind of important to understand the scope of what that assessment was done on, right? Was it done for that particular product? So, for example, FedRAMP Marketplace is a really good example, like you mentioned, because FedRAMP really targets the application, right? So if you want to go to DocuSign, for example, you'll go to FedRAMP and see is DocuSign in the FedRAMP Marketplace. And what they're doing is they're certifying the application. Sometimes you'll see like an ISO certification for an organization. Well, that just means that maybe their offices, they passed an ISO certification at their office, but in terms of what they're presenting in terms of an application, maybe that element has not been ISO certified yet. Same thing with SOC 2 Type 2 reports, right? There's a lot of nuance to understanding what was actually reviewed in the assessment, and so they may advertise, we have a SOC 2 Type 2. Well, for what? Is it for this product or the other? Is it for the one that I'm purchasing, or this other one that you're selling? Things like that.
And Tim, I've seen one time in almost 5 years where a vendor has produced, it was pretty thorough. They produced their third-party assessment, audit, whatever you want to call it, but that third party also provided an attestation that this vendor had an ISO certification, and that certification, and they verified that. But I've only seen that once in 5 years.
Okay.
But it was
Would you
very handy.
encourage people to do that? I mean,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes our job a lot easier.
sounds good. Thank you.
All right, Paul and Sherry, I see another question in the chat here. So for those businesses that are not part of state government, are there any programs that can be consulted that can support BAs in a similar role like you guys do at CSS that you know of?
Well, gosh. So just out of curiosity, the other BAs here, are they from cities and counties?
Typically, that's our audience base.
Okay, so city, county, state.
Typically, yeah.
Okay.
And some quasi-state, so like lottery and safe.
Yeah. The first thing that came to my mind is CISA and MSISAC, Paul, but they're not going to help in a day-to-day type procurement
Yeah.
or vendor evaluation or anything like that. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head other than your own internal resources. Hopefully you have somebody that has a security hat that you can go to, and they might wear a variety of hats, but they have that where you could go consult with.
I mean, depending on my time, you know, I'm more than happy to take a call from somebody if somebody wants to talk some of this stuff out. You know, just to kind of give some pointers, some more details about what to do, how to do it. I'm
Sherry
more
just
than
lost
happy
her
to
mind.
kind of to offer that up to anybody if they want to have a question. But honestly, I would say get a good relationship with your whoever's responsible for your legal representation, right? Get a conversation with them going about what do you think we should do? How would you like to approach this? How would you like to approach that? And then if you have any cybersecurity professionals within your organization, start a conversation. You know, ask them what's important to you in these kinds of situations. Maybe there's a regulated data concern that has not been considered, and start bringing them to the table and just get it out in the open.
And I'm totally joking by waving my finger no, because we do have in the near future, we are hoping at CSS to be able to partner more with the locals, you know, cities, counties, special districts, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, so we would never turn anybody away that has a question. And Jennifer,
we're super swamped right now. That's another reason why we're.
and if you have a
like,
project, we have some vendors. If you have a project that requires IQMS, right? So you have vendors, the IQMS vendor that comes in and looks at a project under different lenses, and one of them would be security. So you might have, thank you JLB for the cue, you might have somebody like, I know on one of my projects, I'm working with NTT. I don't even know what that stands for, but they're one of our vendors that does IQMS. And so we get interviewed by them specific to security. Gartner's another vendor out there that does IQMS, and I can't think of the others. I think we have 10 or 12 under contract for the state or something like that. That if a project requires IQMS or QA, then those would be one of the individuals that maybe if you're at a city or county, you could reach out to as well.
All right, thank you both. I don't see any other questions.
I really
I'm
thought
gonna
we
go-
would only take like 20 minutes.
I know people, you often think that you're only going to take a short amount of time, right? But then when you actually get to it and you start talking about a topic, especially one that you have some passion for, and some life, some of your soul is kind of behind it, so to speak, right? You end up talking a little bit longer than you expected pretty much every time, in my experience anyway. But pretty good on time. We're coming in the last 9 minutes. Hopefully those of you that joined us today are liking this new time slot, and we're getting done before 4 o'clock instead of 4:30 like we used to. The recording will be available on our website once I get done with all of the prep work that we have to do to the recording and checking the closed caption transcript and making sure that it's all clean and tidy for you. I will get it posted up to the website. So be checking the Bang website for that in a couple of weeks, probably. That's usually about how long it takes me to get it posted. We will also have a PDF of the slides that Sherry and Paul used. They were kind enough to give those to us ahead of time. So we'll have those up on the website as well. And then, as always, shameless plug for our partners over at PMUG. Not sure what all's going on over there, so hopefully you're subscribed to their mailing list. They don't have a whole lot updated on their website right now. Maybe they're going through an update to that. And then we have our next session in April is already planned. We're going to have Steve Younger come in and talk about regulatory program compliance and why should us BAs care about it. So that one should be a fun one. I'm looking forward to that topic and Stephen as a speaker. So that'll be fun. Looking forward to it. Hopefully see you all in April, and we'll give you all a few minutes back. So thank you very much for joining us. And thank you again, Sherry and Paul.
Thank you for having us.
Fun. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
All right.